We are a progressive, welcoming, inclusive, and judgment-free congregation. We are in a liberal religious community of diverse and free-thinking individuals. And the UUFCC, at its best, is a spiritual community where reason and social justice matters. As people who learn, love, share, and serve together, we welcome you all. Please mute yourselves. I just heard some background noise, which is particularly distracting to the person talking. So in the course of our hour together today, we invite you to have a candle with you or something that could serve as a chalice that we'll light together. We ask you to wait to do chat to when we say to share your joys and concerns, and make sure you sing really, really loud, but on mute. So just keep reminding you, you don't need to share your screen. That also messes things up. But you know, there's always a fresh surprise with the technology on Zoom. So we don't know what will happen today. So it is our regular practice to open with the song, Enter, Rejoice, and Zoom In. And Linda, today's tech director, will play the words on the screen. And we highly encourage you to get in the dance mode with this, use your gestures, enter, rejoice, and zoom in. Thank you, Linda. My biggest fear as the host is I'll forget to mute myself while I'm singing really loud and out of tune. So someone text me if I do that. So if you have your chalice ready, first I'll say a few words and then we'll do a little chalice recitation affirmation together. I can't actually light my chalice in here because the fan, overhead fan, we are in Florida, blows it right out. So my words to you, these are my words. Today, let us light the chalice to kindle the flame of our community, expanded by the presence of our guests. Fire ignites our hearts. Fire ignites our spirits, and fire ignites our minds. May our community flame help us to remember that we are together in our desire to have open hearts and minds and to do good work in this world. Now, perhaps you will light your chalice with me and together we'll recite our affirmation. I'm sorry we don't have that printed out here. If you don't know it, just make it up. Here we go. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another. All right. So for our opening words today, I'd like to note that many of us may not have had, those of us in the US, this is not the same for Canada, have not had the kind of holiday that we are accustomed to having at Thanksgiving. So I want to remind you that in last week's service, when I was giving the talk, I talked about how gratitude truly lights up circuits in our brain. And that when we light up one circuit, whether we have to make up the gratitude or not, we start to notice all the other things to be grateful for. So for this profound opening template, I will quote a meme that I have seen several times on Facebook. Not everything is canceled. Sunshine is not canceled. Dancing is not canceled. Relationships are not canceled. Love is not canceled. Reading is not canceled. Naps are not canceled, and music is not canceled. Imagination is not canceled, kindness is not canceled, and conversation is not canceled. So a special welcome and greeting to our visitors today. As I mentioned, some of these folks might have been invited here from Liz. Maybe others of you have seen our UU link in the local newspapers. However you got here, we're so glad that you are here with us. And what we'll do next is Linda will play this song that Liz chose for the service today. And while that song is playing, you can introduce yourselves, maybe just say your names and where you are from. And yeah, that's what we'll do next. Thank you. I'm muting myself.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, yeah, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. Then our heart is in a holy place. Then our heart is in a holy place.
I'm back. Awesome. That was a rockin' version of that song. So now we take some time to share and tune into our joys and sorrows of this week. I was sent a notice from Mary Jane in the office, and I just heard that Christina Joy was very close to this transition of life, but Bonnie Southwind passed away after an extended illness. And more information will come to you from the office. So, in the complexity of life, we now share both our sorrows and our joys. We will put a song on and invite you to write your joys and sorrows into the chat box to share with everyone. Here we go. Thank you, Linda. That was a lot longer than we usually take, but I'm so glad we listened to the whole Anita Baker song. And I'm very deeply moved. I'm so glad we're with each other this way, taking in these joys and sorrows. Let's take a moment for ourselves right now. If you're comfortable with closing your eyes, after all that reading of words, drop into the back of your eyes and ground for a minute, tuning into any joys and sorrows that perhaps you weren't ready to share with the community, but just to catch up with your own center of joy and sorrow. And to end this minute, I will be quiet. And to end this minute, I will then ring the bowl.
Oh, shit. I don't want to.
Mute yourself. I just want to acknowledge again that while there is much loss, much change in these times, there's always other parts to life. It's complicated. So thank you for being with all of the complexity of life. So now our featured guest speaker, Liz James. Rev Dan invited Liz. He'd been following her on the Hysterical Society part of Facebook, the page on Facebook. And Liz just said to me, the only important thing for you to know is blame Rev Dan if you don't enjoy her talk. To you, Liz.
Thanks, Samara. Samara's making a reference to a coordinating email that Reverend Dan sent where he introduced each member of the planning team in turn and said what they did, and then said, if anything goes wrong, it's this person's fault. If anything goes wrong, it's this person's fault. So I'm excited to be asked to speak with you this morning. And as I am Canadian, I can assure you that if anything goes wrong, it is Canada's fault, and I apologize on that country's behalf. My name is Liz, and I run Mirth and Dignity. Oh, and already I have a technical thing.
Yeah,
Give me 1 second. Has that improved now?
You're back.
Excellent. My name is Liz. I still run Mirth and Dignity. We're an organization that does UU humor and evangelism. We run the Facebook group, the UU Hysterical Society, and we have a podcast and do fundraising for people in need in Africa as well. And Dan said to me, hey, want to come talk to my congregation? They love humor. And I said, you know what's hilarious is stories about people in need in Africa. And he agreed to let me give you this talk anyways. So if you do not like it, it is his fault. Although I will happily apologize on his behalf if you would like. I spent the winter holiday season 3 years ago in the backwoods of Kenya, in safari country. We were visiting the home village of my friend Salesh, who is a Maasai warrior who I met at church in Canada, but I will get to that part in a second. The Maasai are the tribe that a lot of people think of when they're imagining untouched African culture. They dress in very bright fabrics, they have ears that are cut, and are almost always seen carrying large amounts of water or herding cows. They're one of the few tribes in Africa that remained nearly untouched by colonialism. They are fiercely independent, and their herds of cows allow them to live nomadically. So whenever the white people got too close, the Maasai would strike hard and then they would disappear into the jungle. Because of this, my friend Salesh got to grow up exactly as many generations of Maasai before him did. No English, no reading, no writing, no electricity, unlimited exercise, time with friends, fresh air, sunshine. In early adulthood, Salesh fell in love with a Canadian who was visiting, and they had a family, and that's how he came to be in a church in the snowy depths of Canada, where he and I became friends. I was one of the people in our church who gets to know newcomers, and Salesh and I got along well right away. He was really interested in the church. not because he had a ton of interest in Unitarianism specifically, but because he was very community-minded. And church was one place that a newcomer to Canada could find community. And Unitarian Universalist Church was where you could find community without being told that if you don't give up your evil African superstitions, you will go straight to hell. I remember the newcomer dinner Celeste's family had been attending for about 6 months at this point, and how I took pains to pull Celeste aside and explain some of the points of the orientation more carefully because his English wasn't great yet. And in particular, I remember showing him this chart of how our church works. It's a fairly small church, but it has a very big chart. And it has, the board, and then there's flow charts, and there's lines, and there's all the different committees, and the lay chaplains, and the voting, and all the things. And so I kind of tried to walk him through it. And he looked at it for a long time, and then he listened to my explanation, and then he shook his head, and he said, no. And I said, no, really, this is how we make decisions. And he said, no. Usually the mothers make the decisions while you are watching the children and talking. I've seen it. And I said, yeah, but there's also this. And he looked at it a little bit longer. And then he said slowly, this looks like a lot of work. And I explained that it is a lot of work, but it's important and we do it to create community. You don't have to do this for community, he said. How you have community is you bring many people together and then they make a community. Many, many people, they make a community without these, he struggled for the word, committees. It was like he was trying to explain that 2 + 2 = 4 because that's what 4 is, and it doesn't need a committee to become 4, it's just 4. There's a certain tone in my experience that people from Africa sometimes get when they are trying to explain things to white people. They don't want to offend you, but they also kind of would like you to understand. When you're in Canada talking about committees, they generally give up after a little bit. But when you're in Kenya with them, they try a lot harder. When we first arrived in Kenya 3 years ago, the first thing Celeste did was drive us to the plaque in the center of his village and haul us all out of the Jeep to stand around it. The plaque marks the death of a white tourist a few years back. We read it. It was in English, and it told the story of a man waking up in the early hours of the morning and heading out for a walk and being mauled by a wild elephant. The plaque, as I read it, was about the dangers of African elephants. Celeste saw the cause of death a little differently, and so he explained, this man had a Maasai guard. Like you have a Maasai guard, this man did not listen to his Maasai guard and went for a short walk by himself, and the elephant killed him immediately. When Mzungu people do not listen to their Maasai guards, they die right away. Mzungu is the word for white people, and it really came in handy for me. Every time I couldn't see something, like a nest of birds that was 3 feet from my face that my guide was trying to show me, I would point to my eyes and I would say, Mzungu. Or every time I did something stupid, I would use that word and they would all shrug like, yep, what are you gonna do? Being a Mzungu meant being under constant supervision in case you decided to pet a snake or cuddle a lion cub or something like that. Mzungu could not be left unattended except in their tent with a guide standing outside to make sure they didn't do something crazy like wake up early and go for a walk by themselves. I often wondered about my Maasai guard, who followed me everywhere, carrying his spear that was basically just a sharp stick. His job was to protect me from lions, and he was paid reasonably well for it, at least reasonably well for a no-lion day. I couldn't shake the feeling that if a lion did arrive, his wages would no longer be sufficient for the task of stepping between myself and the lion, carrying his, I cannot emphasize this enough, just a pointy stick. I asked Celeste about this. How do I know he wouldn't run away? I said. Celeste looked at me like I had a cabbage for a head. You're under his protection, Celeste answered. But he doesn't know me and he doesn't care about me, so why would he? He's Maasai, said Celeste, and you are under his protection. There was a pause, and then Celeste repeated, he's Maasai again, as though this should settle it. That night, my sleep was interrupted by what I can only describe as a moaning, growling, groaning kerfuffle of noises. I was nestled in the tent that I mentioned earlier. It was a very nice tent. It was the nicest tent you have ever been in. It had like a flush toilet and a tub and a deck. It was, though, still a canvas tent. Thicker canvas than in Canada, sure, but not lion-proof level of thick, not even scissor-proof level of thick. And I tried to tell myself that this was a magical tent, and when I was in the tent, the lions would have no idea that I was even there, but that required a lot of mental discipline to keep believing that. And when the lions arrived one night, I quickly realized that I could tell they were there through the canvas. So undoubtedly, they could tell that I was there through the canvas. They presumably did not have Mzungu eyes that made it very hard to see anything. They knew what a nest of humans looked like. Presumably, they didn't have Mzungu noses either, and this was not smell-proof canvas. They knew I was in there. It wasn't just the lions that had arrived, too. Some other creature was out there, some new African creature that I'd never heard before, making this terrified, mysterious, bleating, moaning kind of sound. And there were the sounds of the men, several men yelling to each other in the local language. I lay frozen in the dark. Nobody had to tell me to stay in my tent. I was terrified of the lion. I was afraid of the dark, too, which felt like a wet washcloth pressing against your face. It's so absolute dark. I was afraid of this new animal with its exotic noise that sounded like it was coming from something huge and mysterious. In the morning, and I did make it to the morning, I learned that the mysterious new animal was in fact a cow. I have never heard cows being afraid, and it turns out that when cows are afraid for their lives, they don't sound like moo moo in the old MacDonald song. Afraid cows do not sound like moo moo, much like afraid humans facing a lion do not sound like, hi there, pleased to meet you. The cow had wandered away from the herd in a nearby village, and a team of Maasai men had tracked it. They found it eventually. That was the good news. The bad news was that they found it after dark, and we're talking can't see your hand in front of your face kind of dark. The other bad news is that they found it at the same time as a lion found it. The noises that I heard were the Maasai guards stepping in between the cow and the lion and shooing it away with their weapons, which I cannot emphasize this part enough, were machetes and pointy sticks, used largely without the benefit of sight. They won the battle. Lions are afraid of Maasai men, and it eventually retreated. Selesh says this is usually how it goes. Lions are afraid of Maasai and will kill a Maasai warrior very rarely. Then he immediately qualified that a lion will kill a Mzungu on sight every time for no reason before I got any ideas. I was too hung up on the word rarely here to absorb his lecture. Wait, I said, you said they very rarely kill Maasai, meaning never, meaning sometimes someone dies. Well, not often, Selesh said. Not often is not the same as never. I couldn't imagine risking my life like that, I said. They are Maasai, Selesh answered, like it was a complete sentence again. And then, a Maasai can't give up on his cow. Suddenly it all slid into place. It wasn't just about the one cow. Suddenly my Mzungu eyes could see the big picture. The Maasai had survived for centuries through their reputation for bravery and self-sufficiency and honor. A Maasai never gives up. And the fact that everybody knows that is their greatest asset. The lions did not tangle with the Maasai. The neighboring Kikuyu tribe did not tangle with the Maasai. Even the Mzungus did not tangle with the Maasai, and the Mzungus tangled with everybody. In modern times, however, Mzungus are not adversaries exactly. They were tourists, and they brought lots of money, which they exchanged for a chance to look at wild animals safely. The reason my guard would protect me at all costs was because if one Maasai guard let one tourist die, everyone's reputation would suffer. The entire region's economy would be put into jeopardy from his lack of bravery. Everyone's livelihood and independence was at stake. He will protect me, I said, because I am like a cow to him. Selesh nodded. A Maasai can't give up a cow because a Maasai can't give up his reputation or his independence. His Maasai identity is how many, many generations of his people have survived. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach because I wasn't here as a tourist on safari. I wasn't here to look at wild animals. I was here working on behalf of the El Tumo Well Project. The El Tumo Well Project began with my home community raising money for a well in Selesh's village. Over time, the well had grown into a garden and then a community center, and there was a budding relationship between the two communities, and I was here as part of that relationship to talk to the Maasai about some challenges to their way of life. In recent years, the Kenyan government had divided the land and deeded it to individual Maasai, so they couldn't move around anymore to chase the rainy season, and this was taking a toll on their livestock, half of whom had died in the last year. Also, without the regular wars with the Kikuyu, the Maasai population was growing, and finite land can't sustain that large of a population on a livestock-based diet. Add to that the challenges of global warming, and it was clear that the outside world was finally reaching the Maasai, and that they needed help in adapting to it. This had all sounded really simple back home in Saskatoon. As it goes, the saying is, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man a fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And I was here to tell the Maasai that they needed new skills and guide them in that transformation. But when the task was in front of me, it felt very different. Here in Kenya, I was just one more white person arriving to tell the Maasai how they needed to give up their cows and embrace the future. One more colonizer telling them, oh, this time it's different, just like every colonizer had told them before me. I was going to say this like I was some kind of expert too. Me, shadowed by a Maasai guard who had to follow me to keep me from trying to stick a green mamba in my mouth or some idiotic thing. Here, Muzungus were just the cash cows you had to keep from killing themselves long enough for them to get their photos for Instagram and go back home again. Teach them to fish? What kind of arrogant idea was that? As we rode to the well site on the day of the big meeting, I felt this new feeling of unease in my stomach. And I found myself thinking back to the advice of my friend Fulgence and hoping to find something to hold on to. I met Reverend Fulgence Ndadijimana when he was visiting from Burundi almost 10 years ago now. He was the minister of the congregation in Bujumbura there at the time. I remember him telling me how Unitarianism was practiced in Burundi and us marveling at how different it was and asking him what made it Unitarianism at its core. He explained about a commitment to community, to exploration and freedom of conscience. And then he said he found Canadian Unitarianism to be very different from what he was used to. And he asked us to explain to him what made it Unitarianism at its core. It had not occurred to me that there might be multiple Unitarianisms and that mine might not be the main one. But cultural empiricism in Unitarianism, or in Unitarian Universalism, as it's called as it is in the United States, is a topic for another day. Fulgence reminded me so much of my friend Selesh, which is a little strange because they are from polar opposite backgrounds. Fulgence went to boarding school, he had a degree, he lived in the city, he worked for not-for-profits in addition to running a church on the side, and was from a different country with a totally different language. He grew up in the center of colonialism. Selesh grew up in one of the last pockets of successful resistance to colonialism. But just like an African would look at someone from rural America and someone from Paris and say, Mzungu, I saw the similarities. I saw shadows of my friend Selesh when the ministers asked Reverend Fulgence about his weekly schedule and how he fits all those committees and tasks around his day job. That is a very North American question, he said, and he laughed. And when he found he couldn't get it out of it that easily, he said, we don't exactly have committees in that way. Much of the work that you do here, we just don't do that work. I found myself thinking of Selesh insisting the way that the way the church is actually run is by mothers chatting over toddlers. I found myself wondering if there are other ways of doing things. I didn't yet think in terms of Mzungu eyes, but that was the seed of that idea. So years later, I found myself in a coffee shop with Selesh and Fulgence, meeting to discuss the El Tumo project, of which I was the president at this point. We were meeting to talk about how we were going to explain to the Maasai about giving up their cows. Fulgence has all kinds of experience in not-for-profit and community development, working with groups from many regions of Africa. Selesh brought in-depth knowledge of the Maasai and relationships in the region we were working with. I brought an in-depth knowledge of committee structure and Robert's rules. So mostly I listened. And the meeting unfolded, and it was nothing like I was used to. Fulgence asked questions after question, detailed things about everything from how the Maasai chose whose hut was built where to the ratio of goats to cows. He frequently expressed admiration for the Maasai, whose spirit is admired all over Africa. But he mostly listened. And at the end, when Selesh asked for advice, Fulgence said, the Maasai have always solved their own problems. The most important thing is for the Maasai to continue to believe that they can solve their own problems. The most important thing is to listen and help as you are asked to help, and only in the ways that you are asked to help. I thought about this during the Jeep ride. I thought about it as the women filed in for our meetings, as I cooed at babies and sipped at tea and offered granola bars from my bag. I observed every woman arriving and putting 10 shillings in the coffer. It was 20 if you were late. I asked questions through my translator and learned that the husbands take the money that the women try to save up. So they have an investment club where they pool tiny amounts and buy one big thing all at once, like a goat for one woman or school fees for another. They each take turns according to their need and situation. And so it was easy to do, as Fulgence had said, to express admiration for the ingenuity and the perseverance of these women. It was hard, though, to bring the conversation around to giving up their cows. Especially because even with my Mzungu eyes, I couldn't escape the fact that I wasn't the right person to teach these women to fish. I could see the big picture. I could see that the cow thing wasn't going to work, but I was coming face to face with my own incompetence in their world, and I had no illusions about having a better alternative to offer. One of the older women took a breath to speak. The cows, she told me, are not working. There are too many people, there is not enough land or water, and the herds are dying. It is not going to work much longer for us to live this way. Of course they already knew. Of course they knew. They were living in the middle of it. We try to sell things at the market, the woman explained, but we have to borrow what we sell, and that's very expensive to run a store that way. We know how to make beaded jewelry for tourists, but borrowing the money for beads, it involves much interest. We know how to make honey. We have resorts willing to buy from us, but it costs money to make it sanitary for the tourists and to package it properly. So we need you to talk to the white mothers and ask them to help us. Of course they had a plan. They didn't need me to teach them to fish. As Trevor Noah, the comedian, says, these people knew how to fish. They just didn't have fishing rods. The amounts for the projects that the women were planning were in the hundreds of dollars. I wrote down their stories, I took their pictures, I ran the simplest and easiest crowdfunding campaign of my life. Westerners were moved by the story, and the money poured in. We took the money and we used it to fund the projects, but as a microloan with a catch. When the loan got paid back, it didn't get paid back to us. It got paid back to a community, and that council in Kenya would decide who could borrow the money next and what it would be spent on next. In this way, it could transform the whole village. But it transformed me too. I finally understood on a gut level why so many friends from the NGO world had tried to tell me, that people are experts in their own contexts, and it's best to support local people in taking leadership, to give away power, to do only your piece. That there are solutions that your Mzungu eyes can't see, and it's okay to lean on the guide to see what you can't. This is a lesson that doesn't just work in African settings. I find it to be true of the work I do in Canada too. We have a saying in our congregation that the truth is not spoken until many voices are heard. And I have come to the understanding that this is how you end up with so many committees. Sometimes the task does require many, many voices, but sometimes the task requires expertise, and one or two people have that expertise, and the task is to trust them. Sometimes the task is to work and participate in decisions. Sometimes it's to step back. Sometimes the job is not to create bigger institutions, but to figure out what can be cut back and what can be dispensed with. And to do this, it helps so much to have as many types of eyes on the problem as possible. I ask myself what I can let go of all the time now. I ask myself how to put relationship before work all the time now. I ask myself, what's the bigger goal? What's the tiny piece that is mine alone to do? I ask myself what my Mzungu eyes can't see all the time now, and who I should call on for help. I expected this transformation to be humbling. Coming to understand my limited expertise and giving up power would be hard, but it has been the opposite. It's been freeing. Now I can focus on what I'm good at, gathering and telling stories, and let someone else work on the things like creating microloan plans for places and cultures far away. It is more effective, and it is more relaxing. And it makes me part of something that's congruent with my values and something I'm proud of. And also, I get to attend fewer committee meetings. One sec. So it is a bit hard to do the visual cues on Zoom, but that was the end of the sermon. We are now moving on to the offering. And I want to tell you a little bit about the offering charity, which you would think would be the El Tumo Well Project, but it isn't, because they're fine. They've got what they need. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this offering charity before Samara tells you about the logistics part of the offering. So I invite you to get comfortable, because even though this is not technically part of the sermon, it is still also its own significant story. In the story about the Maasai, I refer to Fulgence's living in Burundi and then hanging out at a coffee shop in Canada, and there's a little bit in there that needs filling in. Fulgence and I had been friends for a couple of years when civil unrest hit Burundi. The church there was standing up for democracy in a way that the government wasn't happy with, and it was attacked. Fulgence and others from his community were thrown in prison, and I was part of a global movement to get him out. We wrote letters, we signed petitions, we phoned officials. Every day in between interrogations, Fulgence was allowed visitors, and they would tell him about the efforts to free him. Every night, Fulgence would lay in the dark, picturing all the people who hadn't forgotten him, and he would hold the image of the flaming chalice bright in his mind. Fulgence was released on a technicality, to be rearrested, but he was able to make it to the border into Rwanda and eventually to Canada as a refugee. He is now a credentialed minister in North America, and his wife and son are here with him. Not everyone from his home community has been so lucky. And so in 2018, he founded a not-for-profit called Flaming Chalice International, so named because of the image that kept him going in prison. Flaming Chalice does work in Burundi to improve people's lives, but also works to bring some of the people who have fled when Fulgence did to safety in Canada. We have something here called a private sponsorship program, where a group can raise the funds to sponsor a family for the first year of life for a group of refugees, and then we bring them over and above the government totals. So last Christmas, the Hysterical Society, the Facebook group I'm a part of, took on the task of raising money for 6 of the people that Fulgence had left behind. And it has been a long year, and we are now within $1,000 of that goal. And right now, every dollar we collect is matched by the UU funding panel. I want to deviate from the script a little bit and say that I've been helping refugees for about 20 years, and it's very hard to do wisely. And it's very hard to know how to spend money wisely. And in the few years I've been working with Fulgence and Flaming Chalice International, I have been struck by how very carefully they spend every dollar, which, I mean, you're part of a church community. You can imagine what it would be like if some of you were safe and some of you weren't, and how very careful you would be with the money that you were using. I know that not everyone is in a position to help right now, and that there are many good causes that need support. And this might not be the one that calls you, but if it does, I invite you to join with us by whatever Samara's about to explain technical-wise, and be part of bringing Ratifa, Yannick, Jean, Is, Elvis, and Armand to their new life in a new country. Samara, over to you.
Wow, Liz, that was such an amazing talk. I just have to say first, my jaw hurts from laughing so much, and how beautiful this work that you're doing in the world. So we just have 2 simple ways right now where if you have the phone app Venmo, you can donate to the UUFCC. And we've just also been doing payments through check. So you could send it to the office, and on your memo, or if you do it from your bank and have your bank send it to the office, just put cows in the memo line, and we will make sure that it gets to the right place. And I hope everyone will, do your part, do what feels good. That's it. Back to you, Liz.
Before my closing words, I'm sorry, I got one more story. This is a nugget of wisdom that, again, I learned from Reverend Fulgence immediately after he arrived in Canada. He presented himself at the Canadian border with instructions from the lawyer that said, respond to all of their questions without ever saying you are planning on declaring refugee status, and also without ever saying you are not planning to declare it. He was interviewed for 3 hours, asked that question directly over and over and over again. When I asked him about it afterwards, he referred to it as the best interrogation I have ever had. Apparently, Canadians are very polite when we interrogate people. After that, he was free to come to his new home in Saskatoon and begin the work of earning his North American ministry credentials and working on behalf of those he left behind. I can't imagine the urgency he must have felt. But he didn't come to Saskatoon. First, he stayed for a couple of months with a friend in Montreal, and he did no work. He exercised, he went for walks, he told his story over and over again, and he put himself back together. I already knew all those truisms about self-care and putting on your own mask before assisting others. I just somehow assumed that when things were really, really bad, those rules didn't apply. And I learned from watching Reverend Fulgence that that's when they apply extra. These rules apply extra to all of us in the last months. So I want to end by encouraging you to take a moment to think of what you need to do for yourself this week. What could you do that would be fun, or comforting, or luxurious? And I also want to ask you what you could give up this week. Is there something you could let go of? Is there an expectation you're holding of yourself or others? Or some kind of task that realistically is not going to get done anyways anytime soon? Are there things that you've been watching or following that you could pay a little less attention to in order to leave room for more things that bring you joy? I want to end with a poem. You are not on call for the pain of the world. I know you feel every hit of the hammer beating plowshares into swords and people into plowshares. And every time you fail to step between the blow and its target, the injustice is sewn into your bones too. And so when the hammer rises, you must rise with it, raising your voice, your eyes, your awareness, your body, whatever part of you that can be given as an offering. You can't stay this way forever. Sewn to this cacophony of blows, every movement of yours a follow until your body is owned by the drumbeat of the raising of weapons, until your days string together in a stuttering heartbreak of rage and you can't catch breath. But this is what you promised. To those who don't get to choose whether or not to show up for the fight, you promised that you'd hold nothing back. I know. Except you can't be on call for the pain of the world. It's not work that can be done without sleep. When we said people are too sacred to be beaten into plowshares or swords, we meant you. We need you for the fight, and we need you for all the things that are more and less than fighting. We need you to be ready to listen in the soft way the earth listens to the rain in the hours before dawn. We need you to be tender, to cradle precious things, to hold the smell of dew in your hair, to hum the song that flowers will rise up through the earth to hear. I need you to stay in love with the world. And now Samara will extinguish our chalice.
And now we extinguish the chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of our community. May these ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we are together again. Liz, if you would put into the chat box who wrote that poem, that would be great.
It was me.
It was you. Oh my goodness. Well, I have a copy of that. If anyone wants it, I have the whole talk and the poem. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Liz. Whew. Yeah, there's our sign language clapping, which you can see on Zoom. So smoothly, we segue to the life of the community. I just have one announcement. Again, it's from the Immigration Justice Committee. And they are setting up a toy drive for the children who are at the camp in Matamoros opposite Brownsville, Texas. The best way, I think, for you all to follow with that is to look at your updates, look at your newsletter, the information about sending checks and actually bringing toys is there. That's from Betty Barriga. Thank you so much. So now we will do our closing song, Go Now in Peace.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. Let us set off our summer everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, let us set off our
That's our very own choir. It was a little surreal. It almost sounded like two things were playing at once. So now we are done. We invite everybody, including our guests, to stay around for small group chats. The host will put us into breakout rooms. Liz, because you added this little bit at the end of the script, why don't you just say a couple, just read, the things that you're suggesting from the Hysterical Society.
Oh, that's an accident. That's at the end of the script. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I'm going to say it anyway then. I think that within our chats, we like to catch up with each other. But when I saw this, I thought, Liz, this is brilliant. This is a good suggestion for the chats. Tell a story of something you learned that has made you more effective. Tell a story of a time you stepped out of your home culture. Tell a story about travel. So if any
Can I add one? Can I add something?
Yes,
so often the reason those questions are cut and paste is when there's like a group conversation. I like to start by saying, this is the question I have for you, but feel free to ignore it and answer the question you wish I'd asked instead. Yeah, one that I would add to that is maybe a story about something that you're going to do to be extra kind to yourself this week, like a night or something you're going to let go of or something like that. That too.
Beautiful. All right, everyone, you can unmute yourselves, or maybe Linda's going to do the unmuting. We're here together. It takes a few minutes to get into the small groups because Lori Bell, but I don't think it's Lori, waits for people to leave to see who's going to stay. Anyone want to say anything about how Liz's talk touched you? That would be most welcome now. Keep us on gallery view here, Linda. Yeah.